Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Startup Operator. In this episode, I'll be speaking to Anand Datta, who is a venture capitalist at Nexus Venture Partners. Anand has been a founder himself and now works with early stage startups in domains like fintech, insurtech, education, logistics, and so on. We're going to be talking to him about a bunch of interesting things like startups, investing, and so on. Without further ado, welcome Anand to the Startup Operator podcast.
Thanks, Roshan. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah. So before we begin, congratulations are in order, right? Postman raising $58 million at a $2 billion valuation. It's a phenomenal story, right? You want to talk us through it?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's 150 million. $2
Oh,
billion.
sorry, 150 million. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Postman's association with Nexus obviously predates me by a long shot. So, but like any other company in Nexus, so we are always firm believer on product first companies, and Postman probably epitomizes that. The economy is going to be an API economy in future
Yeah.
when we are seeing already playing out. And Postman is has so much of bottoms up love around that. Like you ask any developer, we already have like 10 million developers on Postman. So you ask any developer,
Yeah.
they'll know about Postman. So that's what like we have always believed in, and the founders are like just phenomenal. So we have always believed in founder first, product first companies which build up on bottoms up love and networking effect. And Postman is probably the poster kid of that entire
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah.
Obviously, very very happy. But I think a lot of other exciting news are in store from Nexus as well. So we
Amazing.
believe that the same stories will be getting repeated by multiple Indian startups
Yeah.
beyond Nexus also like the entire ecosystem that will play out.
Yeah. No, the sheer scale of Postman, right? 10 million developers. I mean, I was just saying this on a previous podcast that, GitHub perhaps has about 40 million developers, right? And it's a 10 or 12-year-old story. And Postman has got to that in about half the time, right? So it's just amazing, amazing.
Absolutely. And most probably like in future sometime get Jishnu or Samir to come on your podcast always.
Yeah,
Also,
I'd
they
love
will
to,
be super excited to talk about the entire journey. They have seen
right?
it firsthand. It's still playing out, and I believe Postman will be much larger than what you are. You're just getting started over there.
Yeah, yeah. So let's dive right in, and talk about your journey as well, right? You've been an operator and a founder yourself, and now you're an investor, right? And you've sort of seen both sides of the table. So
Yeah.
what has that transition been like?
Yeah, that's been very interesting, Roshan. In fact, the way I love to put it, I many times tell my wife that I've almost like rolled like a ball from here to there, and, and I gained experience through the kicks that I've received.
Right.
So, if you see, it's not been only just like an operator, like a founder, and then now into an investor. If you see my journey, I started as a strategy consultant with
Yeah,
Bain.
consulting.
So I've seen very large companies over there at a steady state what sort of challenges they see. In Bain, I got a opportunity to go on a transfer to Valley. So I
Mm.
could see in Valley how the tech firms, really large tech firms, and also like gaming studios of the world worked on multiple projects to see how they work and what has helped them reach where they have and how the ecosystem there behaves. Then I have from there I moved on to and saw that 0 to 1 in a startup where literally in Magic Pin I was there at day zero, starting the company along with Rich and Anshu at Delivery's top floor, where we didn't even have an office and we were just trying to get some interns in. To moving on to Bima, where Bima was at a growth stage where were passed beyond Series A and saw this scaling up where we launched them in 14 geographies around the world, picked up more than $150 million in funding, and then the company really
Right.
scaled up. And in between, did my startup, which could raise no funding, and we failed. And we were literally like in 6-7 months with tail behind our backs, we just folded and came back like, okay, we are not able to pull it off. So that's been quite a journey. Learned a lot of things. Then now the idea of getting on the VC side was helping the startups with whatever I've learned, and also from my side, learning from the startups. Like which every entrepreneur that comes,
Yeah.
irrespective of age or the experience or what they are doing. The startups is mostly about first principle thinking. You have to think from scratch. You are pretty much doing things which others have not done, at least in a way that you are visioning to do it. So it's always an exciting journey that way. So yeah, absolutely, very very excited now to be part of those journeys, and
Yeah,
if possible live, and otherwise learn, mostly learn.
right. Yeah, I mean, you get to live multiple journeys right now, right? I mean, you get to see
Absolutely.
multiple zero to ones with different founders that you work with, especially early stage, right? So there are, a couple of things I want to unpack, from the things that you mentioned. One is like, your experience of sort of diagnosing the problems at large companies and then, looking at it very objectively, right? What are some things that, large companies can learn from startups?
Yeah.
Obviously pace is one thing.
Yeah. You know what I realized while working at strategy consulting, which was most of the large companies, what happens is that the DNA goes towards thinking that we have so much experience and we can solve every problem by experience.
Mm.
Whereas consulting or strategy consulting, whether it's be MEC, BCG, Bain, or whether it be any other consulting, I realized very early on that all the consulting was all about breaking larger problem into smaller
Smaller chunks, yeah.
different buckets and solving that buckets. Most of the time it also ended up being either through benchmarking or through first principle thinking or talking to a few experts in a very very short project wise way. I
Right.
believe the biggest thing for the large companies to learn from startup is this first principle thinking method of breaking even the large problems and not falling in the trap that hey, I will solve it just by experience.
Mm.
Because just by experience literally means that I will go back to whiteboard with the thinking which I have been doing all this while, which has actually led to this problem that we are in.
Mm.
So any sort of change or innovation cannot happen that way.
Right.
And that's the big thing. It's not about like there are multiple, obviously tech will be there, innovation will be there, new business models will be there. But at the core or the underlying layer, if I think it's that DNA of an entrepreneur that whatever big challenge it is, I will break it down. I'll break it down to multiple smaller challenges and I'll just solve it, go around solving it with grit.
Right.
That's what is the biggest thing I would say the larger companies
Right.
should learn from.
And what is something that startups can learn from large companies? Processes and so on, right?
Yeah, I think the larger companies, what startups should learn from is mostly their history. I would say more than the processes. And the processes form, and for the most companies, they go through a couple of different distinct stages, and the processes will come. But as as my boss and my teacher, my first boss in Tata Steel used to always talk about, never you should never commit the mistakes to learn from them. You should always look at others' mistakes to learn from them.
Mm.
And any companies when it has grown, it has gone through a trail of different experiences. I always encourage my founders to read through books like Shoe Dog from
Yeah.
this guy,
Till night.
Nike guy, or even like other biographies or other things which follows the case studies of this larger companies. There is a lot from to learn, like good to great. This has captures like 11 great companies over there. So if you learn from what mistakes or what good things they have done, there is a lot to learn from that, more than the processes and others. Processes, frankly, there is every year, every 5 years, there is a new fad around processes. Sometimes there will be OKR, sometimes there will
Right.
be KPIs, KRAs, sometimes there will be Six Sigma.
Right.
Those things can get set
Yeah.
when the time.
And also, I mean, it's very intrinsic to a particular startup as well, right? I mean, it kind of grows organically, I feel, right? You learn
It,
from, yeah.
It does. Benchmarking always helps. So I'm not like trivializing what the processes are. And at a certain stage after, so you go to 0 to 1, then 1 to you to get certain level. After a certain level, for the company, the CEO and founders, all the role is to set the org structure, set the KPI, set the
Mm.
right feedback mechanism from the KPI, and let that engine run. So when I was,
Right.
for example, when I was running some of these markets in Bima, my own everything was just 4-step process. Hire the right guy, train them well, set the KPIs, and set a feedback mechanism so that this engine could run, keep running.
Yeah.
Now, there are benchmarking and other things that you can do over here. There are things that you can learn from other companies and the larger companies and put it in place. Like what is the best KRA or KPIs in this particular market segment, what you do. But those are more benchmarking exercises to look at them and then put it in your context and work around them.
Right.
But if I were taking to a little more macro views on what you can learn from this from the larger companies, I would say pick up some companies which you think are a great success, and do pick up some companies which you think have been very big failure from a success
Right.
position,
Right.
and then learn from that.
Yeah. No, it's a very important point that you bring up, right? Because quite often what I see is startups are like very prone to reinventing everything, right? But you don't really have to. I mean, if you look at history, for example, right, of innovation or whatever, there are plenty of examples of people having tried something and failed at that particular thing for very precise reasons as well, right? So another thing that you mentioned, while talking about your journey was the fact that you failed at your startup yourself, right? That must have been a very humbling feeling, right? But it
Yeah.
also gives you amazing perspective right now when you talk to founders as well who are going through that journey.
Yeah.
How does that come to the fore when you have some of these interactions with founders?
See, it humbles me. The very, very first is as simple as a line goes. It humbles me and keeps me grounded.
Hmm.
What happens in VC for sure? First of all, what happens in startup ecosystem? Every startup is not fundable, and every fundable startup is not VC fundable, and obviously every VC fundable startup is not fundable by that particular organization.
Yeah.
So it's not necessary every year if we meet 1,000 startups, it's not like probably 999 of them will not get funded. One that will get funded is not necessarily that Nexus will fund them.
Right.
So, but at the time of talking to the founder, I have always keep in back of my mind that like I give him enough respect and time that I cannot be dismissive to him, because I was somewhere at his position where I had an idea. I
Right.
had all the tick boxes to say like good founding team, everything. I tried to run a few pilots, but I just could not raise money. And that time people did not fund me. That did not
Yeah.
make, at least in my eyes, myself a lesser person though. So that's one thing. Like nothing goes on to like I respect each and every founder that comes to talk to me in
Right.
equal way, whether I fund them or not.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's super important, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so let's talk about, more fundamentally, what is it that you look for, right? When you're investing in early stage startups, everyone says cliches like, good idea, great team, and definitely that's something that's important. But what do you see are some things that founders should know about that they usually miss?
Okay. That's a very deep question, actually, Roshan, because it becomes contextual so many times. I'm still learning. The things which I've seen very closely being followed in Nexus, and also I'm trying to follow it as much as possible, is that a combination of large space, that is, challenge is a meaningful enough challenge
Hmm.
to be solved at this moment. There is certain things which are happening at this moment that this is the right time to solve that problem. Clubbed with an entrepreneur who is really driven
Hmm.
and has a deep understanding of it. Many a times an entrepreneur just do it because like the space is there.
Hmm.
But you have to have some real reason why you are best suited to solve that problem and nobody else. And
Yeah. Why you? Why now? Right?
yeah, and you show that intent by having gone deep into it, by having understood that what are the so most of the time on spaces I learn more from the entrepreneur that than at the time of diligencing
Yeah.
than I have to give it to them. So and that becomes a criteria that okay, there are things which are coming out from this entrepreneur which a normal person will not pick up, and that's why when this guy starts working on this project or the startup,
Yeah.
then he will be best suited to create a large enough company which others won't.
Right.
So that depth in thinking is something which I would suggest every founder to come with. Don't come up with a very high level, market secondary such.
Right.
Spend that.
The usual the usual TAM slide on, this big the market and then 1% and
You know,
so on, right?
you're right, and I don't even spend any time on the TAM slide, because you just tell me, and by the feel of it, everybody, you also, Roshan, and I will know whether the market is big enough or not.
Yeah.
And after that, whether the market is $1 billion or $1.2 billion or $20 billion, it doesn't matter. There's a market.
Right. And it
So I
grows.
don't, and it grows. So I don't even spend time on that TAM. In fact, one of my first investments when it happened, I didn't even go through the deck. It
Hmm.
was the founder and me, we sitting on the whiteboard and just charting it out on what are the things, why will it work, why will it not work, and we literally did not open our laptop.
Hmm.
So that's where the depth of the founder comes out on how deep can he think, and can he on the flow like get the creative juices going or not.
Right. So one of the interesting things that you've just mentioned is also that, you kind of look at this in perspective, right? In terms of a comparison between, okay, like when you say why you, why now? Uh, so how much of this is evaluating an idea in its own merit, and then, evaluating an idea in comparison with every other alternate solution that's out there, you know?
Hmm. It will always be a mix of both, right, Roshan? Like
Mm.
idea has to have its own merit, but it like okay. So when if you say in comparison with completely disparate idea, of course it's just on its own merit. Like whether it's on its own merit can form a big, large enough company or not.
Right.
But let's say if there is an idea on edtech, for example, if there is an idea coming on edtech, definitely compared to the different ways, similar problem, let's say problem of accessibility on edtech. But there is a content way of solving the problem of accessibility. There is an online one-to-one teaching way. There is an online classes way.
Yeah.
Then there will be obviously a relative thinking whether which approach to this problem makes more sense.
No,
And
I think
that
I think I didn't articulate that properly. So, do you have like a thesis way of thinking about startups? Is I think that would be a better question.
got it. Sorry. So in Nexus we don't. In Nexus
Right.
we don't. I know that there are firms and there are merits and advantages and disadvantages of doing both.
Hmm.
Obviously, there is in back of mind always going on themes which are due to certain tailwinds,
Hmm.
which are macro tailwinds, can be much more feasible right now. So if there is a lot of data penetration going, content is something which will come up. There is a large company
Right.
that can come up on content. So there are tailwinds, but when each startup or each pitch comes, it's standalone on its own merit,
Right.
always.
Right. Right. So I can't not ask this question to someone in venture, right? Which is that, the whole WeWork phenomena that happened. I think it was sort of a reset phenomena for folks in the industry, right? What do you see as some positives that have come out of it? I mean, one is obviously there's an acute focus on profitability and things like that, right? But any other thing that you can think of or similar milestones?
Yeah, I wouldn't term it just focus on profitability. I would term it on more on focus on sustainability, because many internet businesses still will at the initial phases might remain unprofitable because there is a seeding that is required,
Right.
but they should have eventual unit economics and profitability. But and sustainable business model is what is required. I think that's definitely one of the biggest positive. Second, I think there is more and more discussions on the valuation side as well, that what is a sensible valuation method and which companies are tech companies versus which companies aren't tech companies.
Yeah.
Not to say that non-tech companies are bad companies, like most of the great companies are non-tech companies, but then their valuation should happen differently, not
Doesn't
as
justify the multiple, basically.
that doesn't justify the multiples,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes what happens is that non-tech, if it's a company which has raised at a very high multiple, then it's just chasing some numbers,
Hmm.
where actually if you had a good business model to be created,
Hmm.
just because you're chasing some artificial numbers, you don't focus on creating the product and the model
Hmm.
which actually could solve that problem, right? Like your focus completely goes away into those multiples, which justifies the next round of valuation, which doesn't
Yeah.
go into creating a down round and all.
Yeah. Yeah.
The product never gets built and the solution never comes out.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there was this whole famous rant of Chamath, right, on the whole VC business. Some part of the VC business being like a fundraising business, basically. I raise at a higher multiple and then hand it off to someone else and so on. Yeah. So lot of the startups that you meet, I mean, they're early stage, right? They might have some traction, they have a few customers and so on. From that stage to building a business, right? That's a huge leap, right? And there's a lot of scale. I mean, people have to scale, processes have to scale, product has to scale, and so on. This whole scaling process, right? What are some of the common mistakes that you notice in this?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think what are the common? So it's a great question. It's a very deep question again, because a lot of these are contextual. I would say
Mm.
if I had to draw common threads out, one I would say that time spent on hiring is the most important time spent.
Right.
Like I know I cannot, I know it's a little cliche to say, but the number of time people commit a mistake on that. And I can empathize on that as well, right? Because as a startup, you have only a finite time in which you have to perform. It's always a burning platform. Now, whether you go for the absolute best that you are, or you go for the good enough that you are getting at that time, how do you strike a balance? But a lot of this becomes almost like, I always joke that in MBA, the most I ignored HR as a subject the most, and now I'm realizing with VC as well as in startup, is probably all I was doing was hiring the right guys or backing the right guys.
Right.
So spending more and more time and getting that engine going, which attracts the good talent, which attracts. For example, if you, let's say, you think you don't hire the right CTO, and you say that, okay, abhi ke liye this engineering will work with this sort of a CTO, he will never be able to attract the right talent below him.
Right.
So now you're setting the DNA of the company where you're setting an org which is not for success, right? So everything flows over there. So hiring is one. I would say hiring is definitely one, and then I would say the setting up the DNA of the company towards sometimes the first flywheel to get it moving. That's the most difficult part of the startup. Everything starts from there and it moves from there. Many times you keep over optimizing on stuff and the first higher flywheel doesn't move. So getting that balance right, that I'm creating the product, at the same time I'm getting the flywheel to move by hacking into some stuff. In Magic Pin, we started by doing deals on WhatsApp and everything instead of getting the full-fledged product out. And the tech then caught up. So there is a very fine balance. If you keep only hacking, then you will not get a good product. But if you completely keep waiting for a product till you start iterating, then the company will never start or start running. So getting that balance right, it's a very fine balance that you could do not completely ignore the product. You keep building the product in parallel. And at the same time, you are hacking enough to get the first flywheel moving, getting to the first 1,000 customers. That mix and balance of it is the most critical thing. Most of the companies end up failing on that. And the good companies, they, even if they fail, they keep iterating fast and keep with a very gritty attitude, keep working on that problem. That's what helps them succeed.
So growth, I think, pushes product, right? I mean, especially, if you look at B2B or enterprise, growth really pushes product in the direction that it finally should take, basically.
I don't think that's that simple, Roshan. I wish it was that simple. Like many a times, what I've seen is that growth at times completely neglects product also. That you start getting, like customers in a particular way, and you get so fixated in that way that you completely forget that you were out to build a product which was solving a problem. Whereas if you actually look at product, if you build a product which has a product market fit, initial curve might be completely flat, but as soon as you hit the product market fit, it just completely takes away. The best companies, in my view, in my limited experience, what I've seen is hacks in between. Because for the product to get product market fit also, you have to, in a hackish way, get the first few customers in which you can iterate. And then you keep iterating, you keep looking for that product market fit. Once you hit the product market fit, it just zooms past that. So that's sort of, they play hand in gloves, is all I'm saying. Like you cannot sit on your backs and say that I'll keep building the product and suddenly there will be a product with a product market fit which the shiny toy will bring into the market. That doesn't happen. At the same time, it doesn't happen that, hey, I'll keep growing and like this is growing at a certain trajectory, so I'll keep growing. It will go and break at some place. So both have to happen in parallel.
No, fair point. So we are seeing these couple of trends, right? So one angle is like built for Bharat, and the other is built for the world. As a VC, what do you see as opportunities and challenges with both?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah. See, build for Bharat versus build for global. If you ask me, the biggest challenge for build for Bharat is the monetization part. Finally, if you talk about it, we are a very low GDP per capita country. So if we are that, where like money comes from people who have money, right? And if you look at that layer of people who have money in India, that's probably 50 million, 100 million. It's a smaller market. So that's where you are seeing that a lot of interest, and I am a firm believer that the biggest arbitrage India can leverage is its people and the talent it has, and the market access it has gotten abroad. That's where the services company, IT services company got built. And that's where now with the exposure, we are seeing product companies or even the experience, like some experience like EdTech, you will see some of the EdTech companies working where experiences are being provided from India abroad. Their monetization is very easy. So LTV by CAC that you get is very high.
Yeah.
And those LTV by CACs make very valuable companies. So that is the benefit of there. The benefit of Bharat is scale, purely scale. The amount of the population that we have, the sort of the scale at which you can build company here.
Yeah.
There, if you per customer, you are even getting lower ARPU. Still, the scale itself just drives the company forward.
Right.
But that said, that's not as easy to do as said on the drawing boards. It's a very difficult business where
Yeah.
you are working on scale with very low ARPU sort of a company.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about a few of the spaces, the domains that you are personally interested in, invested in as well, right? So,
Yeah.
what are you excited about fintech? Coming up.
Yeah, so the contrarian answer over here is the next few years will be very difficult times for fintech. See, fintech has three, four different verticals and a lot infrastructure layer play. So the verticals if you see are lending, the vertical is savings, vertical is payment, and vertical is insurance. Four broad verticals. And then there is an infra layer, which is more like what the Setus of the world or the Marketa or Played Synapse equivalent that comes up.
Yeah.
Now, lending is going to go through a lot of pain right now just because of the COVID situation, as well as I have always maintained that lending is a collection business. It's not just the writing and data business.
Yeah.
So pure digital lending without strong collection processes is a difficult business it's an easy business to scale because in lending you are giving money to someone, whereas in insurance you are taking money from someone. So lending is the easier to scale, I would say. There are a lot of good companies that are still getting created through new distribution, more things that you're building.
Yeah.
But at the same time, at the zeal of doing that, getting that fast distribution, you can end up creating books which are very difficult to defend. Once the downturn curve is faces problem. If you ask me, most interested, where I am most excited about, I am very excited about insurance. There are strong tailwinds around insurance.
Yeah.
In India, health insurance will be something which will pick up very, very strongly.
Coverage is extremely low, right? I mean, there's such a huge scope for us to sort of expand on that front.
Absolutely. And this is a product which is required. Of course, there will be solutions and customer flows and product solutions which will require, which are not just distribution solution, which goes into the core product itself and solves for the product. So that's where I'm excited a lot. I'm also excited by the entire infrastructure layer play that is happening. So when you see what has happened in Played, Synapse, or Marketa to be this thing, India also has a lot of this banks where they are forming APIs in all their closed IT silos. Now, if you want the entire fintech thing to play out, they will have to play on top of a layer which sort of democratizes all this. So I am, if you ask me, the second place which I'm interested in after insurance and fintech, it's probably that layer that is getting created. Some good companies are coming over there.
Yeah, so there's this fantastic article by Andreessen Horowitz. I mean, someone from Andreessen Horowitz who wrote that every company can be a fintech company, right? Which is that the bank guys can, share this API and be the core banking as such. And other people who are more in tune with consumer needs can build all of the services that's required, right? And we had Nikhil from Setu on a previous podcast as well, and he was talking about, how a lot of these financial institutions are viewing APIs as their sales strategy, distribution strategy, right?
So definitely. That's where, by the way, Postman also becomes very interesting. All the APIs get built over there. I would say, like, there used to be a saying, I think in Valley we were joking once, that you either die a small startup or you become large enough to be a fintech. It will be either you will just, it's like that Batman analogy that So, but that is the case, because you see what happens in financial services. It's essentially, unlike if you see any e-commerce or otherwise, you have three basic, most interesting pillars. One is like payments and financing. Then you have discovery and product and all that thing happen. And then finally you have the logistics arm where something has to be transferred from one place to another.
Right.
In financial services, that's transfer or the logistics things is not required, right? You can just
Right.
ask, and there is a information which travels.
Right.
And that's where any company which has a very strong distribution and has a hold to the customers,
Yeah.
and in the back end, if they are able to create that financial services layer,
Right.
without that logistics arm, they can just sell it over. That's the thesis, by the way.
Yeah.
Theoretically, that is the case.
Yeah.
And all the banks and everything was created around that. It was bundling of products that, hey, banks, you are making savings. You have the money account with us. I can now do all the financial products on top of me.
Yeah.
That is the theory which all these companies are going. That Amazon is saying that, hey, you have a paying relationship with me. Money and information anyways travels with me.
Yeah.
Why don't I sell you 5 more different products which are
Yeah.
financial services where I have to do nothing more?
Yeah.
That said, it's not as easy to do, because
Yeah.
everything from lending to insurance to savings need very core different DNA, very core different
Yeah.
understanding of
They're
the
different
markets.
businesses, actually.
They are different businesses, and the DNAs of the company. So, for example, like DNA of an e-commerce company is to sell at the fastest pace possible, right? We'll do
Right.
big billion day sale, we will do discounts, and we'll sell it.
Yeah.
The DNA of a bank is completely reverse of this. Hey, you are coming for me lending, I won't lend it to you until and unless you qualify for something. This is as polar opposite a DNA as possible. To say that I will suddenly have a group within our this existing company where the key KPI is to sell more, but this lending guy has to say, no, your customer wants EMI, but I'm not going to give it to him.
Right.
It's not as easy as it's said that it will be built.
Yeah. No, I think the only way is for partnerships, right? I mean, where you're striking a balance between that core business where a person is, cognizant of that left-hand side, right-hand side, balancing the accounts as such, and then you have this whole front end, which
Yeah.
is, thinking of convenience of customer and, personalization, so on and so forth. Now, interestingly, I mean, so interestingly, I read this. I was reading this Accenture report yesterday that 27% of the people they polled said that they don't mind buying a financial services product from Amazon, basically.
Yeah.
Right. So
Why would I mind, right? As a
yeah,
customer, I don't mind it,
yeah,
because I might mind buying products. I might buying savings or other things where
right,
trust is involved. I will never buy a savings product on Myntra. But if
yeah,
I'm getting a loan from Myntra, why wouldn't I take it? Because you are giving me the money.
yeah.
Uh,
This is
so
yeah,
so that is there. But I like your partnership point absolutely, Roshan. Like that is how it will happen. Like Zest Money giving loan on some of this
yeah,
platform. That
yeah,
that completely makes sense. Or for example, if you look Alibaba and this one, then they had to sell insurance. They didn't start selling insurance themselves. They
hmm,
came in a partnership and created Zong'an, so that Zong'an could sell insurance over there. So
right,
there has to be some separation so that the DNA of a financial services company comes over there,
yeah,
but we are able to still use the distribution power of
yeah.
these new platforms.
So the other thing is that banks are terrible at cross sell, right? I mean, how many? I mean, they have like 50 plus products, but
Yeah,
you still get sold these products where someone calls you and says,
yeah,
do you want a credit card, right? They have no idea of who I am, what my priorities are, and so on. But that's
yeah,
something that startups and tech companies have been able to do extremely well. It's in their DNA to sort of personalize and
absolutely,
so on. Yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
So
They can do a
another
good job of it for sure.
yeah. So another sector that's dear to you is education, edtech, basically. And we've seen phenomenal stories, right? I mean, Unacademy did more revenue in April than they did in the last 3 years combined, apparently. Uh, so what is it that you're excited about in terms of edtech?
Yeah, see, because edtech is one space. You see, like what, for example, in 0 to 1, Thayal was speaking about that. Most of the developed markets, you get 0 to 1, and then when it starts going from 1 to 100, that's where that 0 to 1 gets copied from developed market into developing markets. And that's where you have seen in Uber, and that's what you have seen in case of all the other Amazon clones and
Yeah,
all this sort of things happen over there. But education is one space where developed market, the problems are way different from what the problems are in developing market.
yeah,
And if you see, many times I get asked this question that, hey, none of the billion-dollar companies have gotten created in the US and others around, edtech. then why is it that tech is so exciting in India or say in China? That's because fundamentally the infrastructure around education in India and China is much. China has obviously leapfrog now, but India is like much more broken. So I grew up in Patna. For my IIT coaching, I would have had to leave my home, leave everything, comfort, go and stay in Kota. I didn't do it. I stayed back in Patna because my parents were like, "Hey, you are. I had some health issues. You do not want to go to Kota right now." So that access issue and that constraint issue on top for access to this higher good education, that access issue is very real in India. And technology and online or internet penetration has the ability to democratize it. So that's where now the models could be different. There is this, and there are different strokes. There is K-12, there is competition prep, there is reskilling and upskilling. Within that, there is content play, there is one-on-one play, there is one-to-many teaching play. The models could be different, but the core problem or the challenge to solve around access to quality education and democratizing that is very important. So, and the heart of it is that this is one area, like education and health are two areas where, unlike what we were talking about earlier in made to Bharat versus made to global model, consumer is not hesitant to pay because they know that this is their guarantee to a good living in future. So parents are ready to shell out that extra bucks to make sure that their kids get quality access to education. So that's where this combination of a very big challenge, real challenge, a potential solution in internet and access through the digital digital penetration, and the ability for the customer to pay for this challenge. That entire mix makes it a really great space to work.
No, I mean, something that that's a very interesting point that you mentioned, right? Because in spaces like healthcare, education, we won't necessarily like follow whatever models have happened in the developed nations, because our problems are so different, right? I mean, we might just leapfrog actually. So we might just leapfrog into that new model, which they will later adopt, I feel. Because education, again, I mean, if you set aside healthcare, education is the primary need, right? Arguably, I mean, we spend more on education than anything else, and especially now, given the whole, we've realized that we can operate remotely, right? So schools and colleges will have to justify, their existence after this, I feel.
Yeah, and the demography also there makes it a large space, right? The number of people who are coming into the system which are below 20 years old, that's multiple times more than the developed countries in the developing country, right? And then to get them placed, get them good education, that makes the space so much larger.
Right. No, absolutely. So the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about was healthcare, right? And I'm personally excited about the prospects of like a consumerization of healthcare, right? So as in, I mean, you think of something like diagnostics or whatever, I don't really have to go to one physical place. I mean, I just get shipped a kit and I do something, and then, all of the data is on the cloud. I can track my stuff, right? And this is not even futuristic, right? We can even, I mean, there are regulations around this or whatever, but this is something that's very much possible. Similarly, taking back control on some of these things, right? I mean, do I really have to go to a hospital? Do I really have to see an MBBS doctor as such, and so on? But there is so much regulation in this, right, that it makes innovation a little hard. How do you advise a healthcare startup? I mean, it must surely, I mean, it's one of those very tricky challenges, right?
Yeah, no, you are absolutely right. It's like healthcare is one space where I always scratch my head a lot because
the answer is so obvious, but then you can't get to it. You can't do it.
Oh yeah, because the regulation is there. See, what will really put the healthcare startups on path to fast ramp up is something which is getting built on the India health stack. I'm really excited about that. I don't know how it is being made and what it is being made. I know, but I'm not getting into that right now in this discussion. But It's more around like what UPI and the NPCI have been able to do in fintech in India, where it's
Yeah.
leapfrog most of the developed country also in payments and
Yeah.
thus the fintech companies. It has the potential to do that. See, the
Yeah.
core problem is what in healthcare is that A, it's regulated definitely. B, it's super fragmented.
Hmm.
Like uh, unlike let's say in e-commerce or unlike in commerce where you have these big chains and all, in India, if you look at the size of the healthcare problem and the chains that we have in terms of the hospitals and the doctors and the hinterlands and all, it's much and the data at every place is completely broken. There is no central data and it's
Yeah.
more of a data place. So it's a much bigger problem over
Yeah.
there. Uh,
Simply having like a unified electronic health records, for example, right? I mean, it could solve so many different things. Yeah.
Correct. So see, and healthcare, then you can break it into different areas, right? There is
Yeah.
I mean, an access problem to quality doctors. I believe telemedicine has potential to solve it. The access problem of finding a doctor, because a lot of us are traveling.
Hmm.
Macto and other places have, other companies have tried to solve it. I don't know how much people would want to give money or not. That's always a question over there, both on
Right.
this, like
Right.
telemedicine uh, and finding discovery of good doctors. There are things around EMR, EHR,
Yeah.
entire having a record so that the quality of the outcome is better.
Yeah.
That is also to be seen. And there is other health aspect where you will see the cult fits of the world and the others where the overall well-being of the people will come into play.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful. Let's see what are the models which come up. The other area in healthcare which I'm very excited about is mental health, because
Yeah.
that's another place which is very much like, that the barrier to all this health tech companies taking off has been healthcare is something where the physical contact is many a times very much desirable by the customer. He wants to go physically check the doctor, otherwise he's not satisfied. Mental health is somewhere where actually online counseling, online uh, overall well-being, and something for which the customer will be, or the consumer
Yeah.
uh, will can fall back on the online methods. So mental health is again something which I'm super excited about.
Yeah. There's an interesting startup called Visa. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It's run by a friend of mine called Ram. And they've done phenomenally well, especially in these times, right? They've seen their usage go up as well. I think they have something like, I don't know if it's 1 million or 10 million app downloads, and they have a paying user base as well. So, yeah, something that you mentioned is absolutely relevant.
Definitely could talk to them and learn more about what is happening in the
Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, sounds like there is surely a need. There is surely a
For sure.
growing.
For sure. Yeah. Uh, okay, let's do a rapid fire round. Okay, short and interesting answers to.
Always, always scared of rapid fire rounds.
No, no, no.
It's like,
Don't worry. I mean, it won't be anything scandalous, so don't worry about it.
okay.
Right.
Let's
Uh,
go for it.
okay, the best founder or startup around that nobody has heard of
Best founder
or
or
haven't heard enough of.
haven't heard enough of. Wow.
Very underrated founder or startup.
Obviously, if I have heard, then it will come from the sample set of what I have heard. So I'll
Sure, sure.
rate Abhijit, whom I've recently started working as a very high. Abhijit Vijayvargiya. He was earlier with Capillary. Now
Yeah.
he's started up on with a SaaS startup. I am comparing with him with what I've seen with even established founders. He is a great founder.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Capillary was a heck of a story, right? I mean, I first got to know Capillary sometime, I think 2009.
Yeah.
They were a client of ours on a previous, on a startup that I was working on with that time. And it's been a phenomenal story, especially, how they've grown in China as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Anish and KK both were my batchmate from IIT
Oh,
Kharagpur.
Kharagpur.
Uh,
Okay.
Both phenomenal guys, and what they have done for the SaaS ecosystem in India
Yeah.
is
Fantastic. Yeah.
great.
Okay. One very underrated trait in a founder, underrated trait or characteristic in a founder.
Grit.
Yeah.
I think it's not about anything else. It's just about grit, and most of the time, charismatic founders don't get it. It's all about grit.
Yeah. Okay. The best investment story you've heard of. Best. Let's keep it at postman. Obvious answer, right?
Obvious answer.
Right. So one very underrated characteristic or trait in an investor.
Humility.
Right. Interesting. So Bessemer Ventures has this concept of anti-portfolio, right? Would you like to reveal some of your anti-portfolios?
What do you mean by? I have always gotten confused by the anti-portfolio idea. It's basically what I would have liked to invest into, but
Startups you passed on, but then they became like huge successes.
my investing journey has been very small to give you an anti-portfolio. But probably, yeah, I think Bijak is a company which I looked at a very early stage,
Right.
and I had been. I always like the founders, and the founders are great founders, and I'm
Right.
sure that they are up to building something great. But I couldn't put my head around at that time that what is being built.
Right.
But it seems like they're up to something which is very quite good. They're getting some traction. The
Okay.
story is yet to play out, but I find the founders to be very good over there.
Okay. Maybe not too late. So
Yeah.
the weirdest idea that you got pitched.
Cow urine capsules.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, I was quite like, okay, like, and the guys were doing good business also with that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like, it was revenue making business, but of course something which I couldn't convince myself on that.
Right.
Okay.
But that's one of those things again. I mean, it was there was something doing the rounds on WhatsApp or whatever a few years back, and I actually saw that a lot of medicines do use cow urine, right? So
Yeah, they
yeah,
do. They do.
yeah,
I would like, like there is I would not be dismissive, but
right,
at the same time, in absence of any medical research or anything, I
yeah,
wouldn't. I will find it very, very. So if there was a guy who came to me that I have done this, I've done research, and then I'm reaching to a conclusion that this mix of cow urine will cure this. I was like, I would look at it, but it's just purely like, I've created a supply chain where there are this many cows pissing every day, and I'm going to collect and create a capsule out of it. It's
right. Yeah, I'm reminded of that movie Bala, where the guy recommends a certain
Yeah,
mixture.
that's not that bad. I've seen the movie. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So one thing founders don't know about investors that they should know.
One thing that investors have families which also ask for time, and many a times, like I can understand also because, like for example, when we spend time with founder for that 1 hour becomes very very important time for the founder,
Yeah.
and for us also we have to make sure that we give that complete attention to that time. But at the same time, unfortunately, because of the way the VC industry is, we are probably meeting 4 or 5 more founders on the day, and we have portfolio work as well doing. And then I have to go back and make sure that there's this 1 year old kid who has to be
Yeah.
played with.
Right.
So many a time that becomes a stretch, and I have seen founders getting a little angry that, hey, was it like you were being rude to me? I will
Right.
just make a humble request to this podcast also. No, it's not getting rude. We have to take care of a work-life balance as well.
Yeah. No, I mean, one thing I mean, that's a very good point because I don't think founders really recognize how many people you meet with and on a daily basis, right? And how many ideas you hear. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I mean, the scale of ideas that you have to listen to.
I understand where the founders come from. Like when I was also a founder, like for me, like my idea is my life, and you better give me
Yeah.
that level of importance when I'm talking to you, and I
Right.
completely respect it.
Right.
It's also that we are humans and we have our lives, and we have to at times we can be human in our approach in that discussion.
Right.
So
Now, since you've been at the other end of the table, I want to reverse the question and ask you one thing investors don't really understand about founders.
one thing investors really don't understand about the founders. That's a difficult one because I've now been on the other side of the table for the last. Yeah, I think the investor has to respect the founder on his passion also, right? Like you might find, because you have met the 100 such companies and you know why this idea will completely fail. And you can get a little, at times I've seen with investors that you are always asking me negative, like when I was pitching that, like why this will not work, why this will not work. But founders work more from from that angle, that why this will work and why this will work.
More optimistic. Yeah.
So, yeah, but I don't think that's a very strong idea. This one is not for rapid fire. This is something. The one question I'll have to. It's a good question for me. I'll think through more question.
Right. We should do a follow up when you've considered. Yeah.
That type of question. Yeah. So,
the best quarantine hack that you can recommend to people.
Best quarantine hack. I think the best thing quarantine is doing is that you are getting to spend so much time with your family. Look at it positively. So I would say, see, I know that people are in this two months. I will read so many books. In this 2 months, don't do things which you are not passionate about just by forcing yourself because other people are doing. Like it's not that you have to pick up. You have to pick up 10 different books. Go with the flow. It's a good time pushed onto you where you can spend time with your family. You can talk to your family over Zoom, and people are available to come over Zoom. So I would rather say that बाकी productivity and all हो जाता है life. You'll get it. You'll get it from experience. You'll read 10 books extra per ke, life doesn't change. You'll read hundreds of books over life. So.
Right. Okay. On that very note, the books that you're reading right now, or and podcasts that you listen to as well.
Podcasts, very, very frankly, Roshan, I've started picking up more on podcasts. I keep forgetting. I do like some of the podcasts by Axel. I do.
Axel has this Axel Insights, I think it's called. Yeah.
I like their podcast. I like A16Z's podcast. I like Entrepreneur. I think 100x Entrepreneur or something is the name.
Right.
I like that podcast. Mostly, like more than following a podcast, I found that Twitter is a very, very good aggregator of good podcasts. So I keep following good people, and once in a while they will put up this podcast. For example, Pratik from our team, he's a great listener of podcasts. So within my team, I at times keep following his Twitter handle, and I'll go and just check what podcast he has listened to. So that's my way of picking it up over there. In terms of book, I am reading I know I'm a little late in reading this book, but I'm reading Alibaba right now. There is a book called Alibaba, which is about how Alibaba and how Jack Ma grew and what did they do. So I'm reading it, and I'm revisiting a book actually right now, which is this Good to Great, which I'm revisiting because I was hit with this thing. Like I seen startup, a lot of this star founder culture is going out, where a lot of the founders are. Including the investors also. I am here right now giving a lot of gyan about what should be done and what should not be done. Whereas I distinctly remember in Good to Great, it was, like one of the tenets was that the person at the top leadership has to be so humble that he should be always talking about the company as a brand and not himself as a brand. So when this came out, and I was just thinking about it, and then I repicked the book, and it's always been a very, very good read for me.
Something you can't avoid, right? I mean, because in the initial days, the founder is the startup, basically.
Yeah, but I would say that at the same time, like I'm not saying that the founder definitely should be spending.
But you have to lead with the idea, basically.
No, I would also say that within the company, it's all good. When it becomes a lot of this branding efforts on the Twitter and branding effort everywhere, there's a merit to it. Obviously, ecosystem, different founders learn from the founders who have gone through that journey. There is a lot of merit to it. I was just revisiting the book from the side of, when I'm investing and when I'm talking to my the people who are on my portfolio, the founders. How do we help them in keeping just that hedgehog focus on, or the complete just one focus on their startup, and obviously help the ecosystem, but at the same time, your first priority is your startup.
Yeah, and avoid distractions, basically.
Avoid distractions. It's very easy to get distracted.
Yeah. It's been a super conversation and plenty of insights that I've learned, right? Finally, the last question that I want to ask you is, what are you optimistic about, post-COVID? What do you think will change for the better?
Yeah, I'm generally a very optimistic guy. Not like for investment is making me pessimistic a bit because you have to reject so many ideas. Where as a founder, I would have probably gotten getting excited. कि अरे हाँ चलो ये भी करते हैं.
Right.
But I am overall see COVID will set us back by a couple of quarters for sure. But as a economy, as a humankind, we will get back. I am mostly very positive because what will happen is, see, there is a 2x2 that is running over here. There are areas where there is deep impact and there is a longevity of the impact. I believe that after a couple of quarters, things will start coming back to where it was. But at the same time, the positive outcome will be that some of the ideas which had product market fit, but they need to be tried, they would have gotten tried, and that process will get accelerated. So remote working from home, for example, one more and more companies I'm talking to, they are not going to renew their real estate leases,
Right.
and will work from remote working. That's definitely a gain in efficiency, is what I believe.
Yeah.
So I'm super positive about that, and
yeah. I mean, this whole experience is sort of like forced you to relook a lot of those things, and it's been a back to basics sort of an experience, right, for a lot of us.
Yeah, and a lot of us, we are privileged in how we are still healthy, alive. Our jobs are intact. We are able to make money. My heart goes for a lot of people who have suffered way more than us.
Absolutely.
But that's absolutely positive that after a couple of quarters with the joint efforts, things will start coming back.
Yeah. So that's a good note to end the podcast on. Thank you so much for your time, Anand. It's been a super fun conversation.
Absolutely a pleasure, Roshan. I hope that I could add value, but would love to grab a beer once the COVID thing is over.
Absolutely. Yeah. So,
all right.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you like this episode, then don't forget to share and subscribe. Until next time, stay safe and take care.